Hello there, Tyler Foster here. Continuing on today with my talk on Russian generals, the focus is on Always with Honor by Pyotr Wrangel. This book is what truly got me into the Russian Civil War era, as during the American withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, there was this article that popped up, I can't find it anymore, but there was an article that popped up talking about the withdrawal from Crimea, an event I didn't know much about, but it eventually got me to buy this book, which had a new English translation pop up a year beforehand, so it was perfect timing. The main difference between this book and the previous book I talked about was that this is purely just Drozdovsky's diary. He wrote it, he died, and someone after him compiled it all back together. Always with Honor is all Pyotr Wrangel's work. There's only one section that was added after his death, but other than that, it's mostly him who wrote this. Now, with that being said, I think the first thing I want to talk about is bias. Everyone starts off with bias, and even if you want to try and make an unbiased work, you will always have bias in it. Starting off in the book, Wrangel notes that he is not trying to make this a historical context. He's not trying to make this perfect. He's using documents that he's found to try and back up his viewpoint. And I think that makes this closer to theory, in a way. It's more, this is my evidence towards the following. I think that's a fascinating way of doing it, instead of just posting your diary and hoping everyone reads it. Following on, I want to talk about how Wrangel likes to explain people. So, in the previous book, they'd like to throw an image and a subtitle explaining who the people in the image are. Wrangel doesn't have any images in this entire book. It's just documents or letters, and then him explaining things. So, and when he brings up a character called Atman Semenov, he'll explain they're dark, Mongolian type, and they have a Cossack intelligence, which you can assume to be more warlike in nature. He even says they're not the best when it comes to being in peace, but they'll be perfect for a war role. Another figure, known as the Mad Baron, Ergen von Sturbenberg, he notes is also impossible in peace. I really love how he explains characters. They're fascinating to imagine in your head, and then eventually when you look it up online, you understand why he explained it that way, especially Kornilov, known for the Kornilov affair later on. He explains small, swarthy Mongolian type with a little goatee beard and a black mustache. And I can imagine the exact image that I've seen of him online. And this really is, I love how he explains the characters. And he only does it occasionally, but it's still helpful and very useful to the book, and just a giant boon to the entire book. Now, this first part of the book starts in 1916, when all hell starts to break loose with the Tsar abdicating his son, and then his brother abdicating the throne fully to the revolution. And Wrangel notes how the army is starting to go into disarray. There was a pogrom that started to happen in the Kuban region, and Kerensky, the man who's in control of the nation at this time, slowly notes how his ideas of dying for the revolution, all this stuff, weren't really what the army cared for. Eventually, Kornilov gets into control of the army, and Wrangel notes that a lot of the army seems to be really happy with this. A lot of them really like the guy. Then the Kornilov affair happens, and the entire thing starts to go to shit. With Kornilov being thrown into prison, the army and the nation are effectively on death's door at this point. Wrangel himself even demands his own discharge, as he notes there is of no service to his country he can claim. Later on, the October Revolution would happen, and the main meat and potatoes of the book would start, the Civil War. Following his dismissal from the army, Wrangel retires to Crimea. He doesn't initially join the Civil War, instead he just stays in retirement. Although he's tasked to deal with the Reds, who rule Crimea at this point, and they kill at least 1,000 people. Wrangel manages to escape from them, from just not having a substantial evidence, and his wife backing him up. But eventually the Germans show up to Crimea, and all is mostly well. Although all seems to be well in Crimea, Wrangel is still a bit miffed that the enemy is the master of Russia at this point. He's at least glad that the Germans are more principled than the Red Marauders from before. Later on, Wrangel finds out that there is a volunteer army forming in South Russia, and he goes to join it. Now, I think I'm going to skip over a lot of the aspects that are more similar to the previous book, as it's kind of a bit useless to say there's a lot of chaos going on, and Wrangel is trying his best, but he can't really stop a lot of the generals from just completely demolishing villages or robbing civilians, all of that, since he doesn't have the power that, say, Denikin has at this point, who is in control of the entire volunteer army. What I want to focus on is the political and the Denikin aspect of the book. Now, Denikin, in control of the volunteer army, Pyotr Wrangel notes that he's not doing the best with this. He notes that his whole motto, Russia, one and indivisible, is not really doing the best when it comes to an independent Ukraine, the Cossacks, and Georgia, nations who don't really like this and they want to at least keep autonomy or independence. As when you're already on the back foot as much as the volunteer army is, you don't want to keep shooting other people trying to kill the Reds. It's not going to work out in the end. And I think it's interesting to compare this to, say, the provisional government, as the provisional government was fighting its army. And that eventually led to the Reds just gaining control. Now, here, it's the army fighting everyone that's kind of helping the army, and that's just going to let the Reds win in the end. Something brought up in the past book, Drozdovsky's Diary, and this one, is that Denikin does not like to listen to others. A lot of the generals come up with the idea of combining with Kolchak, who's managed to get to the Volga, and then do a push on Moscow. Denikin just wants to do the push on Moscow. And of course, since Denikin doesn't like other people's opinions, his idea wins out in the end. Now, this plan goes to well at first. Wrangel manages to push all the way to Sartsin, which is known as Stalingrad or Volgograd. And he's noting that he's running out of so much. All of his troops are tired and he doesn't have any equipment, so he demands stuff from Denikin. But instead, Denikin replies with, "I see, you want to be the first man to set foot in Moscow." This single line really makes me imagine that at this point Denikin might have lost his mind, and that this small victory that he's managing to get might keep continuing when the fumes are almost out at this point. With General Denikin's greediness at an all-time high, the order to advance on Moscow has been established, and it's an insane order. The entire army, not just the little tangent in Sartsin, the entire, Kharkov, Ryazan, and Sartsin, this entire wide front has been told to meet up in Moscow. That is the entire plan. Wrangel notes that this is effectively a death sentence for the army of South Russia, and that there's no strategy in this. This is effectively just telling the army to walk to Moscow. It's insane. Much of the following section is Wrangel noting to Denikin and Romanovsky that this is an impossible task, and the latter telling him, keep up the offensive. This boils to a head with the army slowly becoming liquidated and having to fall back constantly. No matter what, Denikin will not yield at all. He sends out a program on December 11th noting that Russia will never give up any territory to win any help. Russia won an indivisible, military dictatorship, nothing. No matter what the allies, who France and Britain, are trying to help Russia, they're also giving out their own demands, and Denikin will not listen to any of them. He won't listen to anything, and him and Wrangel just are in constant conflict. Eventually, this all boils to a head with Denikin exiling Wrangel. Wrangel moves to Constantinople, but a bit after, Denikin is ousted from the volunteer army, and they look for a new commander, a new controller of the volunteer army. They ask Wrangel to come back, and despite being ousted from the army twice now, Wrangel decides to go to Russia. The second part of the book focuses heavily on Wrangel's rule over Crimea and the struggles he has to go through in order to survive. There are three main backers of the White Movement currently. the British, the French, and the Americans. While the French are heavily supportive and the Americans are just a bit behind the French when it comes to support, the British don't want this war to keep going on. They want to end it as soon as possible. And they've been trying to talk with the Reds and get the Whites to give up. So Wrangel's in a bit of a predicament, having to keep his entire nation afloat. Wrangel institutes a few plans to make sure that the White Army doesn't immediately collapse like last time. One of those is to stockpile oil and coal for the fleets so that in case it happens, they can flee, and not just a few, but a few thousands. The next one is that he notes down here that his predecessor, who is Denikin, very much his narrow and uncompromising policy completely destroyed any faith that they could have for any allies, especially in Ukraine and Georgia. So his plans are just to try and give mass amnesty to many prisoners, even political prisoners, to try and win them back to his side, as at this point of the war, he needs any manpower possible. Now, those plans are all well and good, but the main thing holding the White Army back at this point, other than manpower, is Crimea. Crimea is a very good defensive position. It's commonly stated that it takes more than 3-to-1 casualties to even capture the peninsula. But the main problem with the peninsula itself is that it has nothing in it. Ukraine has it's the breadbasket of Europe, but that doesn't extend to Crimea. So if Wrangel wants to actually survive longer, he needs to make an expedition to South Ukraine to capture some of that valuable land. Now, with the advantage of South Ukraine going well, I want to take a little sidestep to the politics angle, as currently Wrangel is constantly wrangling with the Allies over trying to make sure they stay and support him, as he notes multiple times throughout different letters that he's posted to others and in here, that the main enemy of Europe should be the Soviets, as this isn't just going to happen in Russia. This is going to be a world-defining thing, and they need to step it up, or else hell's going to break out in their countries. Now, I want to take a little small subsection of the last book I talked about, Drzowski's Diary, and bring it to this one. Ethnic troubles. Of course, there was a bit of ethnic trouble between the Ukrainians, Georgians, and Poles, but this one's on the Jews. In this book, Wrangel posts an interview he has, and it has a little small subsection titled The Jewish Question, where he talks about Jews. Here, he notes that the plain problem is that a lot of people just equate Jews and Bolsheviks together, and that's why a lot of anti-Semitism popped up so fast in anarchic Russia. He notes he wants to use his power to prevent that from happening, as any of these pogroms or other stuff happening is terrible for the state and for the army. And he notes that the only solution to the Jewish question is a lot of social legislation and the state's power backing that stuff. But since he only controls Crimea, there's not much he can do past Crimea. And it's at least a better step than having the previous guy who states he is directly a Judophobe. Moving back to the front, the Poles have their grand success in the Vistula, but despite this, they enter into peace talks with the Soviets. Wrangel tries his best to encourage the Poles to keep the war going on, to possibly even meet up with the Poles and then push across Russia, but this is to no avail. The Poles enter into peace with the Soviets, and Wrangel understands that the entire Soviet army is about to be upon him. With Poland out of the war, the White Army is effectively doomed. No amount of international aid is able to fight against the entire Soviet army focusing on that small little peninsula. But Wrangel still has one more trick up his sleeve. It's all of that coal and oil he stockpiled a few months ago. This brings me back to the start of the video, where I mentioned the American withdrawal from Afghanistan. This is Wrangel's crowning achievement, the evacuation of Crimea. In it, around 150,000 people are evacuated from Crimea, and very little disorder happens, according to American Admiral McCauley. I find the entire character of Wrangel to be fascinating. There's a little small section before Denikin falls from power where Wrangel is arguing with Romanovsky, and Romanovsky states, "Are you worried that the loss at Kharkov will ruin your reputation?" Wrangel states back, "No, I'm not worried about the reputation. I'm worried about the job at hand. You're giving us impossible plans." That small line really shows the difference between Wrangel and a lot of the officers in charge. They're very much incompetent. They care about their reputation in a complete drastic time. And when everything goes to hell in a handbasket, instead of having plans backing up them, they try and rely on Wrangel, who stated that this would be a problem, that they would completely fail in their offensive, that they keep doing this. And it's utterly baffling how it came to this point. Now, with all that being said by Wrangel, I was hoping I'd be able to get Denikin's position on everything, but sadly, the book I have, and the only book that's available, is The Russian Turmoil, which is only the first out of 5 volumes that Denikin wrote, and it's the only one translated nowadays. Every other one is very rare to come across, and this one is only about the provisional government. I think it's a fantastic book that goes into the failures of the provisional government, but it's not about Denikin, the man himself. So sadly, that's where I'm going to leave off on. The only viewpoint I can get from Denikin is that he's very incompetent when it comes to politics and should not have been in charge of the South Russian government. So I really do recommend reading these books. And I hope in the future more come out like them, such as from Kolchak's front, or the Baltic, or even the Arctic front. But sadly, as much as I know, I'm just gonna have to hope and pray that eventually they come out. Well, anyway, thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.